All right, welcome back to the Fit 40 podcast, where we simplify exercise and nutrition for busy parents 40 plus so they can improve their health and feel amazing. I'm your host, Brian Fitzsimmons, certified personal trainer and nutrition coach for people over 40 since 2015. And today we have an awesome guest. We have Dr. Jonathan Stea in the house. He is a clinical psychologist, author of Mind the Science, an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at University of Calgary, specializes in the assessment and treatment of concurrent addiction and mental disorders. And he's published extensively as a science communicator with regular contributions to Scientific American and Psychology Today. So, Dr. Stea, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. That was really kind introduction. Thank you.
Of course, of course. I mean, you're one awesome dude, and I want to pick your brain on a lot of things. So, let's just dive right in. What do you say?
I would love to. Let's unpack the hell out of this stuff.
All right. Now, for anybody who's unfamiliar with Dr. Stea, his most recent book is all about misinformation, pseudoscience, which unfortunately is super prominent today. So I guess if you were to put it all in a nutshell, what do you think are right now the top problems or the top, trends happening that you see a lot of people falling into that really just grinds your gears and you just want to shake some sense into them?
It's so hard to pin it down to one because misinformation and pseudoscience is just so pervasive. I embarked on this mission of trying to, battle mental health related misinformation and pseudoscience years ago, probably about 7 years ago, getting on social media and kind of taking to it. And once I got there, I just noticed that there was an amazing science communication community with so many other people doing the same thing. Not so much in the area of mental health, which is a gap that I really noticed. But since that time, it's just gotten so much worse. And I think a big part of that is because of social media and it just amplifying what we see and amplifying the misinformation and pseudoscience to just an extent that its reach is unbelievable. So, for example, in my world of mental health, they were analyzing. There was a study that came out analyzing the top TikTok videos about ADHD, say, and this study found that over half of the TikTok videos that talked about ADHD, either advice giving in the videos or information about ADHD, half of those videos were misleading. But worse than that, they were viewed millions of times. And there was another study that I'm really grateful to be a part of. A public health team invited me on, and we basically replicated that the methodology. So we looked at the top 1,000 videos about mental health or with the hashtag mental health on TikTok. And we looked at their content from a specific time frame. It was October 2021. And we saw that of those top 1,000 videos on TikTok, mental health, with the hashtag mental health, 33% were misleading. But those videos were viewed over 1 billion times. 1 billion. So again, that shows how far reaching it is. But you ask, what are the ones that really grind my gears? And again, it's hard to kind of pin down. I see a lot of mental illness denial, which I've spoken about. So depression doesn't exist, schizophrenia doesn't exist, ADHD doesn't exist, and a lot of kind of anti-psychiatry sentiments. So, psychiatric medications are more harmful than helpful. We'll hear that from guys with huge platforms like Elon Musk and others. And
we see it all the time in the fitness space too, because everybody's convinced, oh, I'm genetically great, I've got abs, and I'm mentally healthy, so everybody should be.
I can totally imagine. And that's part of the wellness marketing, especially probably in the fitness space, where they kind of over emphasize or magnify the role of personal responsibility in health, which is crucial because we all need personal responsibility in health. But what the wellness narrative does, and probably in the fitness industry, is that it magnifies the role of personal responsibility and it downplays the role of, say, genetics and social factors and just plain old bad luck when it comes to people's health.
Yeah, and I think that's very similar to the way people view obesity, for example, because when you break it down, it is a disease. Criteria is met for a disease state because of the reasons you just mentioned, like environment, genetics, so many things play a role, but everybody's like, oh, you could will yourself out of it. And it's maybe a very small percentage can, but then they don't necessarily fall into that criteria, would they?
No, and you're exactly right. And what they do, it's almost like how propaganda works. It takes a kernel of truth and then it blows it out of proportion. So yes, we need to practice self-care activities to fight obesity. So we need to do our best for exercise and eating nutritiously, etc. But that's not the whole story. There's psychological stuff going on. There's social factors going on where they may not have access to evidence-based treatments, say, and doctors and nurses. There's so many kind of other factors that come into play, even genetics, as we mentioned. So I think that's what the wellness industry does, though, and probably the fitness industry, is that it will pitch a very oversimplified view of how health works and then market products and services based on that distorted narrative.
Yeah. And I think at least my own personal, like, I guess, hypothesis on this is one of the big things that a lot of people do in the wellness space is they really play on emotions. And then this feeds into other problems like diet tribes, for example, like low carb or high or like veganism or things like that. They'll get people riled up. And then it leads into things like cognitive dissonance and like it's escaping me right now, but like different biases that are very common, like naturalistic fallacy, and like it becomes like this shitstorm of like I'm hearing what I want to hear, so I'm just going to believe everything they say.
Exactly. That's really what it does. And
Confirmation bias, that's the one I was looking for. Sorry to cut you off.
no, that's what they do. And I in my book that I wrote that you mentioned at the intro, I have an entire list of what I call alternative medicine tropes and fallacies. Tropes are essentially repeated themes or ideas that we see in a narrative. And so I really make the case that wellness, the wellness industry and alternative medicine, it's not just when I say alternative medicine, I don't just mean a set of unsupported treatments. It's more than that. It's an entire ideology, as you're saying. It's a narrative. It has its own tropes and propaganda tactics and fallacies to cajole audiences and to dupe them. And in part, the way it does that, as you're saying, is it plays off people's emotions, and it really fosters a divisive, polarizing narrative. It tries to get people into tribes and to essentially fight people, and that's essentially what grabs our attention, and that's also what the wellness industry does. And incidentally, what the polarizing narrative really aims for is to divide people against mainstream medicine. It has a very long history, over 100 years of alternative medicine in the wellness industry doing this. So it's basically that mainstream medicine is wrong, the wellness industry is what is right, we're right, we have the solutions, here's your solution. So it needs that polarizing divisive narrative and that emotion to capture audiences and to promote its products.
Yeah, and that label of mainstream is so like it almost is like nails on a chalkboard at this point to anybody who actually kind of knows what they're talking about, because like carnivores are really good at using this terminology, or like the keto people will love saying, "Oh, mainstream this, mainstream that," and it's like so by mainstream you mean like supported by the most literature at this point, which drives the decision making for these societies of people who are experts on this stuff.
Nailed
That's
it.
mainstream.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you can see it's in the languaging, right? Like they'll literally use that. And it's by using just the word mainstream, what it does is it creates an us versus them mentality. So who the hell wants to be in the mainstream, right? It's like it's anti-authoritarian. Screw the doctors, through the government. And that's why it appeals to a lot of people on the, who fall victim to, say, conspiracy mentality, and there's also particular personality traits. But again, it kind of needs, even if you don't buy conspiracies, that's the narrative that it goes after, and it's very deceitful. And by playing on people's emotions, as you're saying, it essentially amounts to emotional exploitation and financial exploitation, because they're selling, at the end of the day, they're selling something.
Yeah. And I mean, when it comes to like things like pharmaceutical industry, for example, like that is one that people love to punch up and say they're horrible, they do this, which there's a lot of truth to that. Like like a lot of the stuff does have truth to it, but at the end of the day, they've got enough money to prove that what they're selling is beyond a doubt, shadow of a doubt, like it does the thing. But then wellness industry can claim 1,000,001 benefits and they're not subject to any scrutiny.
Yes, you absolutely nailed it. And I think it's a super important point, which I'll try to get at from a different angle, because I try to repeatedly help people get that, because that's also part of the narrative. They will be anti-big pharma, right? Big pharma is corrupt. Big pharma has conflicts of interest.
They
True,
do. They
true.
do.
We're acknowledging that. As you said, though, big pharma is regulated though for safety and effectiveness, which the wellness industry is a largely unregulated industry. And the what at the end of the day, problems in big pharma need to be solved with better science, better accountability, and better transparency. We don't solve the problems in big pharma by turning to the $5.6 trillion wellness industry, which again is largely unregulated, and filling those gaps in our knowledge and in our healthcare systems with these pseudoscientific approaches.
Yeah. And I know the big pushback on this is, well, like FDA and pharma basically like trade leadership. Like they're in each other's pockets, they're best friends, which, yeah, they are. But I think one of the things that helped me when I was kind of falling into those pitfalls of like just distrust everybody, only trust the people that are saying the stuff that I want to hear is replication of studies. And I think when it comes to scientific literacy, a lot of people don't have the skills and the tools that they need to be able to be like, okay, I'm making an informed decision, not distrust everybody that doesn't say what I want to hear. So, what would you tell to anybody listening that's like, so how do I know what to trust? Like, how do I know who to believe?
It's a really loaded question and a hard one. And I guess I would start by saying, like, we want to, it's a delicate balance, right? And I think this captures the spirit of science literacy. It's a balance between trusting expertise and remaining skeptical about scientific claims. That's a really hard dance to do. So then, well, the question becomes, well, how do we trust scientific expertise? We need to look at not at one particular expert, say, because you can find any MD, PhD, whatever, to confirm your biases and find an animal study or an anecdotal study to support your claim. So what
Or in
instead we
vitro?
exactly. So instead we look to bodies of say medical bodies or professional organizations where you have a huge number of experts that kind of come together, and what they're doing in say clinical practice guidelines or public health guidelines is they're relaying the scientific consensus. I just posted about this about an hour ago because people get really up in arms and confused about the nature of a scientific consensus. They don't know what that means. They misinterpret a scientific consensus to mean, well, it's just a bunch of dudes around a table who are just agreeing with what they're saying. That's
They're
not what it is.
indoctrinated, man. They're indoctrinated to Western medicine.
Exactly. They're indoctrinated and it's they have a checklist and they've just, they all agree with each other. That's not scientific consensus. Scientific consensus is where a mountain of scientific studies happen to agree with each other and its findings happen to support one another. That's the mountain of scientific. That's how we arrive at consensus. The consensus among experts just happens to be a byproduct of the consensus among the findings and the replication of the results that you just mentioned.
And I think people also don't realize that there are so many experts who are doing research who are chomping at the bit to prove people wrong. Like when a study gets published and people read it, they want to call them out and say, this isn't right or this should be studied further. And they leave these notes and basically rip them to shreds. That's why it's called peer reviewed.
Exactly. That's one of the mechanisms that we have. You notice that a lot of the folks who are, um, chastising, say, buying into the narrative or chastising the peer review process, I doubt that many of them have actually participated in the peer review process. It is grueling. It can be rude. There's even cliches or memes about how reviewer two is like the super rude bad guy because this they don't a lot of the people are trying to show off their own scientific literacy skills by again piercing the hell out of your studies in the holes, and that's how we do good science. It's a gauntlet.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, that's like the best system there is. It's a merit based system where it's like, hey, if you're going to put something out there, stand on your business. Like, make sure you know what you're saying is true because these people are coming for you.
That's exactly right. And to promote, to give a steel man argument though, because people will also critique peer review, because obviously it's not a perfect mechanism either. Because there's different qualities of journals. There's top tier journals, there's lower tier journals, there's even pseudoscientific journals where you can get people that
Yeah.
just happen to not have strong science and literacy skills, and then it can make it past peer review.
But as long
That's
as you pay the fee to get it submitted, it's in.
Exactly. At the end of the day, though, Winston, I like to use a Winston Churchill quip, which is that, peer review, or say evidence-based medicine, is the worst form of medicine except for all the other kinds that have been tried. So what that means is we don't have anything better. What are you going to propose? You're going to listen to a blog hosted on a conspiracy website called Conspiracy Realists. They're the ones who are going to be able to, that's where you want to get your health information. Probably not.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people don't realize when you do go down that path of like, okay, I'm not going to trust mainstream. I'm not going to trust all these big societies and all these things. Like, I'm going to find the real truth. And then you basically get left with nothing. There's no studies that have significant sample sizes. And you're basically just agreeing to set without really saying it. I'm just going to believe what I want to believe.
Yeah, that's like you mentioned, that's confirmation bias. It's there's another psychological phenomenon for it, or another term called motivated reasoning, which is essentially it's reasoning based on our preconceived beliefs and ideas. So it's almost starting from a conclusion and reasoning backwards, and it's kind of like mental gymnastics. Um, and the reason for that is science literacy is hard, and when we're trying to evaluate information, it's not like we're all objective beings doing this. Far from it. We actually have our own personal beliefs and our value systems that come into play, and that filters the way in which we view information. So for example, you can imagine taking the same piece of information or the same newspaper article, and it's going to be read differently by Democrats versus Republicans, or conservatives versus liberals. They're going to interpret that information in a different way. That's why analytical thinking is super important, and not kind of going off after kind of this intuitive, effortless kind of thinking that's based on gut.
Yeah. And that's one of those things too, where if we're talking, say, politics, for example, I know me personally, if I see anything that is clearly like inflammatory, like really trying to drive a certain way, you could assume that, hey, the information I'm about to get is very heavily biased. Like, why do I want to listen to somebody else's point of view? Why can't I just get the facts and make my own mind up about it?
Exactly. And the this is a really unfortunate reality. I think this is why things have gotten a lot worse. Is I have a friend and colleague, Professor Timothy Caulfield, is at the University of Alberta. He's been studying misinformation for literally decades, and he's written books on it.
Wow.
And
God
yeah,
bless them.
he's amazing. He received an Order of Canada in recognition for his work, because he's done a lot of great work. What he's noticed recently, after decades of studying this stuff, is that science has increasingly become politicized. And so what that means is it's essentially an ideological flag. So you can basically guess someone's view, say, on vaccines based on how they identify politically. That's how intertwined the science has come with politics. And that's a very dangerous thing, because we shouldn't be making health decisions based on our political affiliations. We should be making health decisions based on, like we mentioned, expert scientific consensus, and listening to medical professionals and public health professionals.
Yeah. And that's why like when a medical health professional chimes in on, say, pretty much anything that came out of the HHS secretary's mouth, like they just rip them to shreds, because this is common basic scientific knowledge that is not acknowledged, and just shows that we don't have somebody in charge who knows what they're doing. But I don't want to go down that route. But when you said that, as you were saying all of that, it made me remember a conversation I was having with, it was a really good conversation I was having with somebody who comes from a political science background, but got interested in nutrition and was trying to do their due diligence and learn what they wanted to. And he's like, you know what you should do a podcast on? Like, why we should be really mad at the government for things like the food pyramid and for this and for that. And I'm like, if we're going to go at it with the purpose of emotion, then we're defeating the whole purpose.
Yeah, I agree. It just, again, it's playing into that polarizing, emotion laden narrative that, if we're going to ramp up our emotions, we're going to be disadvantaged at interpreting the
Y-
factual information in front of
Yeah.
us.
You immediately have a blind spot. It's like you want to be as clear as possible.
Yeah. Which you mentioned, like it's sadly that's the goal of a lot of wellness promoters or pseudoscience promoters in the wellness industry. They want people to kind of be thrown off guard because that's a marketing tactic. It's always been a marketing tactic. It just happens to be um, used in the wellness industry.
Yeah. And speaking of marketing, because I feel like I had to put this up there being that like you're a psychologist, how do you view something like BetterHelp, where it's like you see a commercial every other YouTube video that's probably going to pop up after this YouTube video for anybody watching on YouTube?
I just encourage people to be, again, I want them to be super skeptical when they see marketing claims, whether it's after a YouTube ad or an Instagram influencers page or an alternative medicine website clinic website. I really wanted to help teach the language of pseudoscientific grift so that people know when that language is spoken. Because I think when people can become more skeptical, see through those tropes, see through the narrative, see through the charades, then they're better informed and they're better positioned to make health decisions that are actually beneficial to them, as opposed to just being sucked into these false claims and false advertising.
Yeah, because I feel like it can be tough. If you don't have like some sort of knowledge on the subject, where's the filter? Like, how do you know? Like, oh, don't fall for this. Like, this is clearly BS. Like, if somebody's speaking about nutrition and I know nutrition and I know they sound like a giant dumbass, nobody else seems to know that who doesn't have nutrition in their background.
Yeah, exactly. It's super hard, and it's hard with mental health, it's hard with nutrition, it's hard with fitness, it's hard with cancer treatments. Like it's really, really hard. And one of the antidotes, it's a multi-pronged solution in order to, escape misinformation. One of the antidotes is to increase our science literacy skills, as we're talking about, but that's not the only thing because there's so many other factors that influence why people fall for misinformation. I think a big component, which maybe has been missing for a long time, is it's not just increasing our science literacy skills. So meaning knowing how science works, knowing about accumulated scientific facts. We also do need to learn that language, that language of wellness, the language of pseudoscience, so that regardless of whether it's cancer or mental health or fitness, you can see through the content and pick out the warning signs. For example, these people are using too many testimonials, they're referencing animal studies, they're they're promoting beliefs that are disconnected from hard-earned centuries of biological and medical knowledge. For example, denying that germs exist is a really easy extreme example.
Yeah.
Which we laugh, but even, the head of the US healthcare system is promoting a kind of germ theory denialism when he says that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. So there's things like that, which is just absolutely bonkers how pseudoscience has really gone mainstream. And I think, again, back to what are the antidotes? Well, we need to strengthen our science literacy skills, our health literacy skills, but also learning that language of pseudoscientific grift. And then also more than that, as you and I talked about it, it's learning to, this is really hard. I don't have a magic wand to be able to help people to do this, but to try to tune into and learn about our own belief systems and kind of upset those biases that filter the way in which we see the world. And I think in part what that means is adopting a kind of intellectual humility that's associated with the scientific spirit, which is quite different than what we see in the, say, conspiracy world, where it's very it's essentially narcissistic, where there is no intellectual humility. It's that they know everything, we don't, and they have the answers, and that's antithetical to the scientific spirit.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I did want to go down this road at some point, which is because I know I have these conversations with clients all the time when we're trying to change eating behaviors and exercise behaviors, which is like every thought that we have is not a fact. Like just because we think it doesn't mean it's true. And it can be so healthy to challenge your beliefs sometimes and just ask yourself, is that true? Like I know for me, I always come at it with the frame of reference of like, I consider myself not too intelligent, so I should probably challenge this and be sure that I'm right.
Absolutely. That's what we need to do to scrutinize claims. That's what we need to do to scrutinize claims about ourselves that we kind of think about. So, what you're mentioning, our thoughts aren't facts. That happens to be one of the fundamental premises of one of the most evidence-based treatments that we have for mental disorders and for mental health called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is
Uh,
kind of
I was
CBT.
guessing that in my head. I was like, is it CBT? Is it CBT?
It's absolutely CBT. So in short, what CBT does for people who might not know what that is it's a model of therapy. It's also, I want to preface this by saying it's also one of the things, it's also become a brand, which is really unfortunate because you will hear people saying that they practice CBT or understand CBT, and then it does not resemble CBT whatsoever. So
Yeah.
again, if you're going to get real CBT, you want to make sure that you're getting a licensed mental health professional, whether it's a psychologist or psychiatrist or social worker or psychiatric nurse. But in essence, CBT just describes a model of the world where we break down our experiences into thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And the spirit of CBT is kind of aligned with science. It tries to it tells us to view our own experiences and ourselves as a scientist, and to view our facts or our thoughts not as facts but as hypotheses, and we try to evaluate evidence for and against them. And that's a huge component of what I do in my day job, of what I've been doing for over 10 years, helping people with depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, even psychosis, is trying to get people to challenge their beliefs. And so, of course, the examples that I just listed are extreme psychopathological examples, but even for the everyday person, we all have our inner critic. We're all skeptical about ourselves at times, maybe um, less gentle towards ourselves than we ought to be. And again, I think you just kind of nailed it, where you kind of just pause and ask yourself, is this thought a fact or is it hypothesis? And what is a more helpful, balanced, realistic way that I can view this thought? It's not about rose-tinted glasses and rainbows and unicorns. It's about trying to take off the bias lenses that we have and see the world in a more realistic way.
Yeah, and I think one of the easiest examples is like how many times have we been at work and we're like, this person is my coworker. They're being such an asshole. They must hate me. They must really like have it out for me. And then you find out like their dog just died and you're like, oh, my bad.
Yes. That 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 that's exactly right. It's trying to
Yeah.
reframe the thought that we're having. We unfortunately we see this in, if I can go on a tangent a bit, like we do see this in mental health care, where if you get someone who has a severe depression, say, or severe depressive disorder, they may go to the local grocery store and say they get shortchanged by the cashier. And someone who doesn't have a depression may think, maybe the cashier miscounted, or maybe they're having a bad day, or whatever it might be. But someone with a major depressive disorder, they, for whatever reason, have developed really these deep core beliefs about themselves, negative core beliefs about themselves over the course of their lifetime for a number of reasons. And so they might think, well, of course the cashier shortchanged me because everyone shortchanges me, because the world shortchanges me, because I'm a loser and I'm a failure. It just goes right down to a kind of core, a negative core belief. And so the work of CBT is trying to help people to shine a light on what core beliefs are actually pulling their strings in that situation, and then trying to get them to reframe them. And that's not an easy process at all. That's what therapy is for, is trying to get people to understand this. But that's just another kind of parallel example to yours.
Yeah, it always kind of circles back to the responsibility and our relationship to it and when it's applicable. I know it is so easy, and I mean, at least from my point of view, not understanding what would differentiate somebody who has a specific disorder versus somebody who does not. But it's very easy, it seems like, for anybody to fall into that trap of the world's out to get me, everything's working against me, and how we handle that.
Absolutely. It's almost like a headspace. Like it's just a very familiar, well-practiced pattern of thinking and even doing. And so we just want to, at least in CBT, or just maybe more generally, is just to become more aware of what are our thinking patterns and how do we undo them.
Exactly. Now, on the topic of responsibility, I'm curious on your thoughts because it seems like there's a lot of people that almost weaponize what they learn in therapy to try and control people around them and you see this a lot on reality TV. Like I spotted it and I'm like, that bitch. But like where they say like I'm dealing with this, so everyone around me has to adjust, not I have to improve myself to a point where I can exist in society. I'm just wondering, when it comes to the back and forth of that, what are your thoughts on like how much is it the responsibility of the individual to change their own behaviors versus like trying to control the social situation determined by others?
It's again, it's these are really nuanced, difficult, complex questions. And so at the end of the day, what helps me understand mental disorders and their treatments is thinking about these ideas um, in using a biopsychosocial lens or a biopsychosocial model, meaning we have biological factors, psychological factors, and social factors that contribute to the causes of mental disorders and their treatments. And so sometimes when we're treating someone with a depression or trauma, say, maybe medication is needed. That's kind of the biological component. Then there's also psychological stuff. That's kind of where the cognitive behavioral therapy kind of comes in. And then there could be kind of real social influences that are hurting someone as well. Maybe they're in poverty, maybe they have job loss, maybe they are in a toxic relationship. I don't know. And so part of therapy is trying to tease out what is real, what is not, what can we control, what can't we control, and trying to figure that stuff out and troubleshoot and problem solve the hell out of a situation that someone's going through. You're saying if people are weaponizing that idea, obviously that's an unhelpful thing for them to do and also for the people in their immediate social circle.
Yeah, I know at least in like the reality TV example that comes to mind for me is that they'll go to therapy, they'll say, "Hey, I learned all these things, but you guys need to do this, this, and this." And they're saying, "I'm working on myself," but they're never actually doing the things that they're saying that they're working on. And they're saying, "But everybody else is the problem." So it turns into this like narcissistic type deal.
Yeah, that sounds like a super unhelpful strategy is to to avoid avoid any insight and to blame other people is obviously an unhelpful thing, which again is kind of what we try to do in therapy is work out if that's happening or not.
Yeah, for sure. Now, another thing I wanted to touch on too was I know, at least in my space with exercise and things like that, people love throwing around the stat that, like, oh, exercise is more powerful than an SSRI or certain things that help manage our mental state. Whereas I feel like anybody who actually knows a little something about people who have that in the mix, like who need medication, like they're not going to exercise or get sunlight without the help of that medication. So it's like we're talking about the chicken without talking about the egg.
Yes, exactly. That's another kind of example of, again, kind of that wellness narrative where it's very oversimplified and hyped because they're often selling you a specific exercise regimen or diet protocol or supplement line or whatever it is. But you're right. I mean, in real mental health care, in real therapy, we do all of it under the purview of evidence-based care. I've been running a group therapy group for over 10 years where we talk about exercise and nutrition and basic kind of self-care
Whoa,
stuff.
whoa, whoa. I thought you were just pill mills. You're a doctor. You only just write prescriptions. You don't actually do the real stuff that we do.
That's what they tell me on social media. I'm called a big pharma shill every single day. And incidentally, the vast majority of psychologists like me, and all of them in Canada, don't even prescribe medication. I'm not allowed. I don't have prescriptive authority, but we're called that anyway. But you're right. I do work on a very fantastic interdisciplinary team with other psychologists, but also psychiatrists, addiction medicine physicians, nurses, etc. And again, back to that biopsychosocial model, exercise, I'm always recommending exercise with all of our patients. But the fact of the matter is that some of them can't exercise for other mental health related reasons. And then there are people who exercise more than anyone I know, and they're still depressed and they're still anxious and they still have trauma and they still have addiction concerns. And so that's why the reality of clinical practice is far more nuanced and far more complex. So yes, obviously, I always recommend exercise. It's an amazing part of people's journeys. There is evidence to support it, and it should not be, those studies shouldn't be weaponized to undermine psychiatric medications, which you do see from the anti-psychiatry movement and the wellness industry as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like you were pointing out before, where it's like you read something that's written by left or right media. It's like you can read a study and be like, oh, it's either or, when it's like, no, how awesome would this be if we combine them?
Exactly. Exactly. That's
But it's what you're
true
looking
mental
for.
health care. Yeah.
And on top of that, I think a lot of the general population who don't understand the types of people that struggle with these things are not just in isolation struggling with this one thing. Like you see it with obesity, for example. Sometimes it's not just obesity, it's mental health issues along with that, or maybe they're chronically sick or chronically in pain, and then they've got this shitstorm of things that they're trying to deal with.
Yes, that tends to be the rule rather than the exception, is that many health concerns are what's called comorbid, or they're concurrent with one another. There's all of these physical and mental health concerns. The clinic that I work at, that I've been doing for over 10 years as my day job every day, is helping people who experience concurrent addiction and mental disorders. So these people have addiction problems, but they also have other mental disorders, and also, as you're saying, chronic pain and other physical health problems as well. So these are very multifactorial problems that require multifactorial solutions.
Exactly. And I like that you brought addiction back up, because I did want to touch on that too. Because another thing in my space that I hear all the time is like, oh, I'm addicted to sugar, or oh, I'm addicted to carbs. And it's like, how can somebody differentiate if they're actually addicted? Because like the stereotypical thing that people like myself would say is like, well, you're not losing your job because you're going to purchase a thing of sugar from the grocery store. You're not like losing your family over cookies. Like, how would you find some middle ground to explain that to somebody if they're addicted, or if it's like maybe it's something else?
Yeah, the colloquial term, or the everyday use of the term addiction, is very different than how it's used medically or clinically. Same with things like OCD. I'm so OCD. It has very specific meaning in a clinical
Guilty.
context. Right. And that's okay as long as we're very clear about what it means. And we don't, and as long as it's not being used to stigmatize people, which is another issue. But with
Yeah.
addiction, I mean, when it comes to addiction, again, it's a very specific criteria. When we do psychological assessments, we're trying to do thorough assessments to see whether people meet criteria for, say, an addictive disorder or a substance use disorder. There's a whole bunch of criteria that's involved. I think when you're talking about people saying they're addicted to sugar or they're addicted to whatever it might be, there's a big difference between addiction and, say, excessive use of something. You can excessively watch TV. It doesn't mean that you're addicted to TV, or same with carbs,
Yeah.
or same with sugar.
Or I know, like right now, guys in my age group, everybody all of a sudden seems to think that they're addicted to porn.
To porn. Well, yeah, that's another super complicated one as well. It's even contentious in the medical community where, technically we don't have something called a sex addiction, but there are people that would fall into criteria that would seem reminiscent of addiction. But again, it really, really depends on a very thorough, nuanced psychological assessment done by people that actually have expertise in this area, because that term gets kind of thrown around as well. I think for
Yeah.
people that really understand, you mentioned, what is an addiction, besides the criteria, it really is about impairment to functioning, and a lot of distress to themselves and causing harm to other people. That's, without those conditions, an addiction likely doesn't exist.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of, like, let's call it what it is, physiological needs are all of a sudden being pathologized.
Yes. Yeah, they certainly can.
Yeah. And I do think it almost it disempowers people at the end of the day, because they slap this label on themselves and they're like, I'm broken goods, or like, I can't do this because of X, Y, and Z. Where it's like, at least in therapy, for example, like you would build tools to get better at certain things, correct?
Yeah, we work on healthy adaptive coping skills in therapy all the time. Um, yeah, and there's, the sex addiction is a really complicated topic. And, one of the things that we look for when we're trying to, it's super kind of, like I mentioned, nuanced. Like there's some people that feel more um say compulsions in sexual activity. Then there's others who, they'll call something sex addiction, but really it's problems with relationships, or it's codependency in relationships, or it's yeah, maybe we'll leave it at there because that's a loaded other kind of
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah, and not to beat a dead horse or anything, but I know as you were saying that, it made me think of like I come from a criminology background, so it kind of went down the criminal route of things when it comes to topics like this, and it also gets into the idea of the fact that like on the surface, sometimes things are done for different reasons. Like sex, for example, some people have it not just to have a good time, but for other aspects. And I think it comes down to that with other types of addiction too, where it's like you aren't necessarily doing the thing because you want to do the thing. It's potentially something else that you're coping with or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's right. Motives come into play as well. It gets even more complicated because then when it comes to there's different recovery models for how people recover from particular addictions, and that's a contentious thing in the literature. So, the question is, does someone need complete abstinence versus sort of a harm reduction model or a moderated use of whatever it might be? And that will vary across various kinds of addictive behaviors, from sex, say, to alcohol, to cannabis, to meth.
Yep, the whole spectrum. Because I mean, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, some people do respond to the cold turkey, but then other times, some people respond to let's wean off gradually. It just depends on who's in front of you, right?
Yep. And we have certain medications that kind of can help people with that as well. Like, for example, people that get addicted to fentanyl or the opioids like heroin, they will need something called opioid agonist therapies like Suboxone or methadone. And those are evidence-based medications that are required, which some people may stay on for a very long time and some people might not either. So again, treatment is very tailored.
Yeah, and it's sad to see some of that stuff get such a, I mean, stigma around it, like methadone clinics, for example. I mean, would you really like get mad at somebody or talk shit about somebody who is chewing on nicotine gum or slaps a patch on their arm to get over cigarettes?
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. Exactly. Some people we need an arsenal of tools to help people with addiction, right? From harm reduction approaches to more abstinence-based approaches. All of it matters because addiction is so, again, it doesn't discriminate. It attacks homeless people, and it attacks doctors and lawyers, and it attacks everyone, literally everyone and anyone, and we each have our own um, causes for why that is, and that means we need a whole host of treatment approaches. It's not a cookie cutter way of treating addiction.
Yeah, which brings me to the thing I wanted to kind of put a bow on it with, which is when people are dealing with this type of stuff, how do you differentiate when it's time to give grace and when it's time to give yourself a bit of a kick in the ass and be like, I need to take some action here?
That's really hard, and at least in the context of therapy. And that might differ too in terms of scopes of practice, because that may differ between, say, a motivational coach versus a psychologist. Because my role is not necessarily to tell people what to do. It's not that at all. I don't give advice. My role is to do psychotherapy, which is a very it's a skill. That's why we have training programs for it, and it's licensed. And so what I'm doing in therapy, what it more looks like, is I'm co-exploring with people and basically trying to help them arrive at their own conclusions and how they're going to quote unquote give themselves a kick in the ass or not, and kind of get to that point. I'm always trying to, like I mentioned, co-explore all facets of a problem with a person for them to kind of arrive at that. I know that, motivational coaches may do a similar thing, but it's a very hard thing to do in the context of, say, mental disorders.
Yeah, and I think one of the people I consider a friend who's also like one of the better coaches in my space, which is Jeb Stewart Johnson, puts it really, really well. He's board certified, I believe, mental health coach, but he said like our role as coaches is to make today and tomorrow better. But when it comes to the psychologists and everybody who are mental health professionals, they are good at fixing yesterday. Like, let's make sure that's not holding us back from having a better today. That's like kind of the differentiator. Would you agree on that?
I think there's elements of it. Yeah. I think,
Yeah.
again, I think it just really, psychotherapy is complicated and people show up for a whole bunch of problems. Sometimes they don't even know why they're there. They just know that they're suffering and they don't know what ails them and they just want to feel better. And it's a journey to even co-explore what the hell is causing the distress and then trying to get them to move forward. Eventually, though, I would say that, even in psychotherapy, we do have a view towards the future. But I think what the person that you mentioned said is valid too, because you can't, you need to know what you don't want in life, and then you also need to know what you do want in life, and all of that matters at the same time.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, that helps a ton because I mean, as coaches, we're always like, okay, what's within our scope and what's outside of it? Because I think mental health especially has become this thing that it's like, well, we all know a little bit about mental health, so we're just going to act like everybody's like therapist while we're their coach. And it's like sometimes that line is a little blurry.
It does get blurry. Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
one of the things I try to, encourage people to be wary of, again, in the wellness industry and in the book. I think, and it's hard to know when people cross that line. I think a crystal clear indicator would be if a person is advertising literally treatment for a health condition when they're not licensed. That's a pretty clear, no fly zone. But I think more insidiously it happens when people don't advertise that and they end up trying to treat someone's trauma or depression or anxiety disorder anyway. That's where it gets really, really muddy and dangerous.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we could know what a good tool is that worked for us or worked for a number of people. But the true experts are not the ones that have the biggest tool belt. They're the ones that know what is a risk, like what could do harm and what more so what not to do, while also having a gigantic tool belt.
Yes, exactly. And I don't want to discount lived experience either. Like you said,
Yeah.
people know and they know what works. In the addiction world where I am, we always at our clinic recommend peer support services. So these are things like, and people have mixed views on this, but things like 12-step programs or smart recovery, which is another peer support kind of model, but it's based loosely around cognitive behavioral therapy. There's another one called Dharma recovery, which is more about mindfulness, Buddhist kind of perspectives. At the end of the day, for my patients, I don't care which model they get, whether it's 12 steps, smart, or Dharma. I care about the power of the group and them going to feel validated and heard and to learn from other people that have gone through a similar situation, because the research and the science shows that that's why peer supports work. It's not about the particular content or philosophy that they're pitching. It's more about that power of the group and the community, because people can feel really alone when they're managing mental health concerns and addiction.
It's interesting you say that because like I know I run a group call for all my clients and once a week and we all get on and honestly half the time I just sit back and like let them talk to each other because they're like solving each other's problems and empathizing in a way that sometimes I can't. And like when you have that many positive people surrounding you, chances of somebody chiming in and giving you exactly what you needed to hear because they've been in your shoes is so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. The power of the group is huge, and really just for a number of reasons. One is just accountability, like showing up for yourself is this is something that I'm working on. If you hear like a tip or a coping skill, that's kind of a bonus. But more than that, it's just about relating and having community and feeling not alone. And that has huge psychological benefits.
Yeah, it's that like primal need for a tribe.
Yeah, and people that actually get you and to feel validated and understood and heard.
Yep, 100%. Now, this conversation was incredible. Like it went tons of different directions, but I know that so many people got a lot out of this. And I have a feeling that this one's going to hit home so well for so many people. So thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
I hope so. And yeah, Brian, that was a ton of fun. So thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Now, if anybody wants to pick up your book, because we've referenced it a bunch and I can't wait to sink my teeth into it and read it front to back. But if anybody else wants to, where can they find that? And where can they find your other media so they could be on the lookout for anything else?
Perfect. They could find me uh, getting harassed and trolled on social media across a number, all the platforms. I think there's like 5 or 6 of them. But more easily, they could find just my website, which is my first and last name.com. So JONATHANSTEA.com.
And for everybody who's a return listener, you already know it's going to be in the description or the show notes wherever you're watching or listening. And if you're new here, go ahead, go check it out, click away, and you will find everything you need to. All right. And along with that, as a thank you to Dr. Stea, if anybody at any point heard something that really hit home and they're like, damn, that is so important. My friend needs to hear this. My family member needs to hear this. Go and share this episode with them. They will thank you for it, and so will we. All right. So again, thank you, Dr. Stea, for spending the hour with me. And thank you, everybody, for making it all the way through. But until next time, I'll see you guys later. Go kick some ass. Bye-bye.